Greetings all, Ferrariman601 here. This mod, before your eyes, has taken the Assetto Corsa world by absolute storm in recent weeks. It is, of course, the IER simulations P13c. Now, this mod, throughout most of its development, flew completely under the cover of night, as nobody was really suspecting that somebody was going to be developing a Le Mans prototype car in 2019 for Assetto Corsa. Looking at the WEC, well, we've got new regulations starting to come in. The hypercar class, the era of LMP1 and LMP2, for the most part, seems to be nearing an end, at least in the World Endurance Championship. Of course, going over stateside into IMSA, things are a bit different yet again. But for the most part, this is a genre of race car that appears to have had its moment of glory and is now going to start fading out gracefully into the sunset of history. Not the case, though, when we're talking about Assetto Corsa and IER, this modding group, not quite as well known as some of the other big names in Assetto Corsa modding today. Of course, you've got your Race Sim Studios and VRCs of the world, and even your ASRs of the world, but what IER have managed to do with this car is not present something which is all-out attractive to your average sim racer in terms of the subject matter of the car. We're talking about a car that's from 2013. We're getting close to 2020 now. So the subject matter here by itself is quite dated, and if you're somebody who is really attracted by the allure of modernity, you want to see what is the latest and greatest out there, you want to get a sense of what these cars must be like to drive for yourself, well, no, this is not something that, on the face of it, is going to be all that attractive to you. However, this mod is a truly groundbreaking bit of absolutely meteoric progress for Assetto Corsa, which itself is a pretty old game by this point. Assetto Corsa first released out there in 2014. We're almost in 2020. We're talking about a game that is itself 6 years old. That is ancient history as far as any sort of PC gaming is concerned, and in the world of sim racing, well, we've got some plenty other things that have come out since 2014 with their own merits and demerits in their own rights. However, Assetto Corsa, like R Factor before it, is very unique in that we have some incredibly talented people in the modding community for this simulation who have managed to keep it unbelievably pertinent and current and, shall we say, habile in terms of overall operability since that 2014 release, and Assetto Corsa today, toward the end of 2019, has far more features than it ever had at the time of its initial 2014 release, and who knows for how much longer this sim may continue to survive and thrive as it still currently is. The case with this car by IER, International Endurance Racing Simulations, is no different. What IER have managed to do with this car is go into the architecture of Assetto Corsa and also combine that with the architecture of some very groundbreaking mods priorly released for the sim, and they've managed to overhaul the way Assetto Corsa treats car physics. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, from the IER website, and I quote here, they say that this mod is based on previous generation LMP1 regulations. The P13c represents the pinnacle of pre-hybrid prototype race cars. Okay, so a concession here to the subject matter, it is already dated. I continue. Its 600 horsepower, naturally aspirated 3.4-liter V8 propels the 890-kilogram chassis to over 200 miles per hour, and its wide front tires and immense downforce allow cornering at well over 3G. On the engineering side, now listen carefully, the car has a very wide setup window and performs well under many conditions, allowing drivers to more consistently perform at a high level. The P13c features numerous physics developments courtesy of the AC shader patch, new thermal models for the brakes and tires, an aerodynamic model, variable motion ratios in the suspension, engine maps, advanced traction control, and more accurate fuel consumption are only a few of the car's standout features, none of which previously seen in Assetto Corsa. There you go. They write 2 paragraphs on their official website about this car, and quite honestly, that's the only introduction that it needs. What we're talking about here in this car's overall package, well, Obviously, we have got ourselves an early 2010s Le Mans prototype car. Powering this thing, the 3.4-liter naturally aspirated V8 based on Honda's old IndyCar block, last seen racing in that series in 2011. So it is the V8 engine, no turbos, no V6s as IndyCar currently runs. This is the last of the naturally aspirated era for IndyCar. This car, its real-world analog being the Honda Performance Development running under the Acura moniker, at least in North America, the ARX-01. That would be the ARX-01 Spec A through Spec E running the V8 engine in the real world. Well, you can see the connection to IndyCar there. However, what else do we have here? We've got 603 horsepower, 485 newton meters of torque, the chassis weight of 890 kilograms, of course, VMAX rated officially at 310 kilometers an hour according to what's available in the Content Manager specs. Specific power-to-weight ratio is 1.48 kilograms per horsepower, so just about 1.5 to 1 in terms of the power-to-weight ratio. So, again, specs not all that spectacular considering some of the other cars that we have seen since in the real world. However, what they talked about in that little introductory paragraph on their website, they have overhauled the physics model via Content Manager and the shaders patch, which of course is far more than just a shaders patch to those of you who do run the shaders patch. It has completely transformed the way that Assetto Corsa's engine calculates physical parameters for the car. That has to do with, of course, we have lighting things, and of course that's the overall point of the shaders patch, to make the game look better. But it has so many physics implements that can go in there and really change the way that the simulator behaves. This car has brake temperature. Now, I know every car in Assetto Corsa has brake temperature, but this car really has brake temperature in that carbon brakes on this thing, you've got to make sure they're in their operational envelope. The aerodynamic profile of this car, what they've managed to do with this is they have basically managed to give every major surface on this car its own aerodynamic properties, which means as you change through the aerodynamic packages that are available on this car, you can see them sort of flashing across the front end at this point, yeah, the car is going to behave differently to some very small setup changes. So yes, that's something that you need to figure out, and we'll go through that when we get the car out on track. In addition to that, tires, they have been completely overhauled. The tires now have proper temperature profiles across their whole working surface. That's going from the inside shoulder to the outside shoulder and all of the area in between. We mentioned the brake temperature. Basically, everything on this is not different from what we currently have in Assetto Corsa, but it is so much more highly refined. And that's really what sim racing, in terms of trying to pursue the ultimate level of realism as close as we can get while sitting stationary in a bedroom or wherever you might be happening to do your bidding, they really want to get more and more detailed in terms of what physics are, and when you get more detailed in terms of your physics, in terms of your sampling rates, in terms of how quickly, in terms of fractions of seconds that you're rendering different physical parameters on the car, you get closer and closer to how things actually behave in the real world. At least that's the theory. And IER have managed to do that to great effect on this mod, as we will see in a few minutes. Looking around on the outside of the car as it has been rotating around here, you can see that we have got ourselves a very, very nice model. It is not the most highly detailed model that we've ever seen in sim racing. However, it certainly looks the part, and I don't think too many people are going to be doubting that. What we've got here on this model, it's absolutely fantastic. We have got 214 total objects according to Content Manager, and those 214 total objects are comprised of 265,110 triangles. So no, they have not simply glossed over the model on this car in pursuit of physical perfection. No, it looks the part inside and out, and of course when we get it out on track, it certainly behaves the part as well. It's absolutely fantastic. Go into the cockpit here and get a sense of what's going on inside. So we fly in. And there we go. This is more or less the view that we get when we are out on track. Of course, everything's switched off in here, but front and center we'd have a big LCD screen, and that's going to be showing us all sorts of different parameters on the car. It really shows us a lot of different parameters. We'll go through that once we get it fired up. You can see a track map of Spa. That belies where we're going to be taking the car next. But great detail in here. You got that funny looking steering wheel with all the buttons and rotary switches on it. To the lower right of that, we've got our brake balance adjuster there. The driver just reach over. To the left-hand side, there you go. All of your different switches for different ancillary functions on the car, things not directly related to driving it. You can see we've got turn signals on there, considering this is a prototype car that would be racing in endurance events and all weather conditions. So yes, mirror signal Maldonado, not really. Down there, we've got a fire bottle, ECU box it looks like, some other telemetry boxes. In the driver's seat, we got seat belts, all kinds of great detail in there. And then, of course, the cockpit surround and the headrest. We have got some great carbon texturing, as we have basically come to expect from all mods of this particular genre. Back there, twin roll hoops, because in theory this is a two-seater car. However, great detailing inside and out, as we can see there. We've got our wing mirrors, we've got those luscious-looking fenders, replete with the louvers right on top for exhausting the high-pressure air so we don't get too much front-end lift at high speed. Good idea. We don't want to be doing any Mark Webber impersonations. But yes, absolutely fantastic stuff inside and out on this thing. And again, the real allure of this car is to see it racing and to drive it yourself because, again, it does some things that are just otherworldly as far as Assetto Corsa has been concerned. In many ways, this car brings features that we've only seen to this point in other sims, such as rFactor 2 and particularly iRacing, in terms of how they simulate all of the other secondary functions, at least in terms of how Assetto Corsa treats things, that a car does. How does it behave in pitch? How does it behave in heave? Again, brake temperature is a big deal in this thing. Engine maps. We have engine maps that we could adjust in the setup screen here as well. That's something that we've only seen in rFactor or iRacing up to this point. So we've gotten ourselves a big step up in terms of what is actually possible with Assetto Corsa. And again, we'll go into detail next at Spa. We'll be bringing this car out on track and show you really what all of this means. Welcome to Spa. Before we get out on track, of course, a look through the setup screen to show you what's going on in the menagerie of setup options available on the P13c. First of all, here's a conventional setup screen, our gearbox. First through sixth, we've got a 6-speed sequential semi-automatic paddle-actuated box in this car. That's pretty normal. First through sixth gear plus the final drive ratio, adjustable to your heart's content, and you do have quite a wide range of adjustment available. We have got a grand total of 15 steps available in the final drive ratio, which, when you completely lengthen sixth gear, gives you a theoretical Vmax, assuming no friction and a vacuum, of 529 kilometers per hour. Of course, we're not going to be getting anywhere near that with 600 horsepower thereabout, but you can see the range of adjustment that you've got available on all 6 forward ratios. Tires, we have quite a few tire compounds available in this car. The default is the S4. It goes all the way up to the S8 compound and all the way down to the S1 compound. The lower the number, the softer the tire. Tire pressure adjustment, we have 22 PSI on default all around. Goes down to 15 PSI and all the way up to 40 PSI, so that's quite a wide tire pressure adjustment available on all 4. The range is the same. Fuel. Now, we start to get into our first of several different sorts of settings that we can get into here. Fuel level, of course, we've got it zeroed out to 0. Maximum is 80 liters right there. We'll keep that quiet for the moment. But the engine map setting, this is unique for this mod. We have 8 different engine modes that we have available in this car. Map 1 is for maximum power and maximum fuel consumption, of course. As you ramp down through steps 2 to step 8, you start to produce less power, but also as a byproduct, you consume less fuel. There is no control binding on your steering wheel to do this on track, so you have to adjust it in the setup screen, but engine maps available for the first time in Assetto Corsa, as far as I am aware. You can see their explanation here. Engine maps provide a way to manage fuel consumption without altering driving style. The maps change the engine's calibration to use more or less fuel, producing corresponding levels of power. The higher the map setting, the less fuel burned and the less power produced. So that's pretty self-explanatory. Again, these are things that you've seen if you've played rFactor, rFactor 2, or iRacing, but for the first time we have settings like these available in Assetto Corsa. Electronics. yet more different sorts of settings that we can play with. Traction control there on the top bar, that's normal. That's the traction control that cuts in under acceleration. So that's going to cut the spark to reduce wheel spin under power. However, traction control setting 2. This is new to Assetto Corsa. Again, this is something that you can play with in rFactor 2 and iRacing to date. But traction control 2, what this does is, while TC1 adjusts the amount of cut and the engagement point for the traction control in straight line scenarios, so again, that is under acceleration, TC2 adjusts traction control for cornering situations. The higher the value, the more the traction control will cut in for changes in yaw, wheel spin speed, and a number of other variables. So in other words, this is for what happens in the second stage of a corner. You've turned in, you've made the apex, and now you're thinking about exit. You're getting the power down. But as you will know from driving cars that have traction control, sometimes even with a high level of TC dialed in, you can get power oversteer. What this TC2 setting does is it will cut in again, acting probably on the rear brake in this situation, although I've not confirmed that. It will cut in to arrest that rotational momentum in yaw. So, as you're getting on the power, you do have enough traction for all-out straight-line acceleration. But if you've got a yaw moment still dialed into the car, again, we're talking about corner exit here, the traction control will cut in and save you from getting too much power oversteer. So again, this means that you can scrub off the least amount of speed possible and still maintain your line without having to do too many corrections through the steering or back out of the throttle. Aero. Now, we have a menagerie of settings available here in the Aero screen as well. They do more or less what you would expect, but they're just spread out differently front relative to rear. Front bodywork. As you saw in the showroom, we do have several different Aero packages available for the front end. Step 3 is the default, but you can see here we go down to Step 2 and Step 1 and Step 0. We do get progressively fewer dive planes across the nose, and on Step 0 we have this very low drag solution with just 2 end fences there across the front splitter. As we step up through Steps 3, 4, 5, we do get more dive planes, and the louvers across the top of the front axle, if you can see there we go, you can see that the louvers also change their configuration as we step down through Steps 4 and 5 there with the maximum front downforce. Bodywork wicker, the second line of this screen. This is what they mean by bodywork wicker. You can see here we're at the tail of the car. It's basically a gurney flap. You can think of this, though, as the top of the diffuser. Bodywork wicker, Step 2 is the default. We go down to Step 1 and Step 0. We get progressively less wicker until we get effectively no wicker. As we go back up, the angle increases and the amount of material there to comprise the wicker physically increases. That is obviously an adjustment for rear downforce. In addition to that, we do have our rear wing, as you would expect. Taking a look across the main plane here, we're on Step 7. As I go down to Step 0, you can see the angle of that rear wing flap go down for less downforce. Going back up through it, up to Step 15, that's maximum rear downforce. The low downforce rear wing, there's no graphical adjustment as far as I can tell with this. But if we set this to Step 1 of Step 0 to 1, that then equips a low downforce rear wing, which means we're going to have less drag and less downforce. So for straight line speed performance, that's going to give you a whole lot less drag at the expense of cornering grip. The other important part about this, brake blanking. Yes, say that 5 times fast. Brake blanking. Well, we've got it on this car, and it's very important because of the different thermal curves that they've been able to implement with this car via Content Manager and the shaders patch. Brake temperatures are very important. These are carbon-carbon brakes, much like you would see on an Indy car or a Formula One car, which means that they have a very narrow temperature envelope in which they work at their best. They work at very high temperatures, but they also need to be maintained basically at stable temperatures. If they're too cold, they don't work. If they're too hot, they don't work, and they could fail. So, brake temperature is important. We adjust that via these blanking panels across the front end. Just watch just to the screen left of where you see that P1 decal. If I ramp it down, you will see that we get more blanking, or less blanking rather. As we ramp up, you can see that we get areas of the bodywork that close down and restrict that airflow. The default is 30 there on the front and 0 at the rear. Rear brake blanking, told you I'd mess it up,
There's no graphical update of this as you go through those settings, I'm led to believe, but the effects are there. And again, you're going to have to do some testing to figure out exactly what level of brake cooling is required for a given circuit and a given setup. Alignment, camber and toe on all four corners. This is utterly conventional, adjusted to your heart's content. Dampers, your fast and slow bound and rebound rates on all four corners. This is also conventional. Drivetrain, differential in power coast and preload. Again, a very conventional setting. Although, the way that this works is a little bit different because you have that TC2 parameter now. You can get away with having a little bit more of an open differential because you have the traction control there to save you. General, this is the Rev Limiter, so 100% is the default. Goes down to 96 if you want. I have no idea why you would want to give the engine less revs. And then brake bias, that is utterly conventional. Suspension, the advanced suspension settings, we have got our roll stiffness, front and rear, and then we have our bump stops in terms of the gap between the top of the suspension travel and the bottom of the bump stop on all four corners. Heave dampers here. This is where you really play with chassis dynamics. This car is very, very good in heave. It gives you great feel, as we'll talk about when we drive it, but this is where you adjust that heave damper. Again, heave talking about the vertical motion of the chassis as it goes up and down over undulations in the racetrack. Final suspension screen, anti-roll bars front and rear, as well as spring rates and ride heights on all four corners. Notice that they're expressing the stiffness of the anti-roll bars in terms of a diameter of the anti-roll bar. Believe this would be in millimeters. It's not, no, it's not labeled here, but I believe that would be millimeters in terms of the actual diameter of the cylindrical bar that is linking the two sides of the suspension for roll stiffness. But there you go. Pit stop strategy, utterly conventional. So, we do have some new settings, some old settings presented in slightly different ways, but we've got a lot of stuff to play with on this car, and it really does show as a complete package. We'll go back to default setup here, and we'll go into the cockpit. Now, in the cockpit, we've got a lot of things to take a look at. That LCD is now completely brought to life, and it's showing us all the information we could ever want. Walkthrough of it, obviously. Front and center, that blue N, that is your gear position indicator as we go up through the gearbox. Obviously, it's going to update showing you which set of cogs is currently engaged, and then back down, neutral, and reverse. It's a gearbox. To the left of that, we have our current lap time just ticking past 10:35 at the moment. That will update, obviously, as you cross timing and scoring to begin another lap. Below that, we have brake bias set to 59% to the front, and as we ramp down, you can see at the top of the screen, we have got that brake bias decreasing, and it's also reiterated on the actual screen in the car in real time, so that's very cool to see. Below that, you can see that blue box with the number 1 in it. That's our current fuel map setting, so we're at step 1 of 8. That's the maximum power setting. To the right of that, in the middle, the pink box, that's our TC1 setting. As we adjust traction control, this is the TC1 in-car button binding adjustment. You can see that updates in real time as well. TC2, that does not update in real time in terms of what you have as a button binding, because I don't believe there's a way to do a button binding for TC2 at this time. But there it is, TC2 on step 4 and TC1 coincidentally on step 4 at the moment as well. In the middle, we have our speed readout in kilometers per hour. Obviously, we're stopped, so it reads 0. And below that, we have water temperature 70 degrees C. The right-hand column, the lap delta, 3 blank bars at the moment. That will show you a live delta relative to your previous best. Below that, fuel economy, that shows you the number of liters that you are using per lap, and that updates instantaneously in real time, so you'll see that jumping around as you drive. Finally, below that, fuel level, or fuel remaining it's actually called, 40 liters, because that's what we have in the tank. Without further ado, though, let's get the thing out onto the track and see what's what. There we go. At more or less IndyCar spec, 3.4 liter naturally aspirated V8 coming into its element now as we go through radio for the first time. Again, the tires are cold and the brakes are cold, so coming up into Lecum at the end of the Kemmel Straight, we're going to be braking a bit earlier than you might think we need to because we have no brake temperature at all. It takes a while for them to get some heat into them, and of course, depending on how you've got the blanking configured, that may be a good or bad thing. second big stop of the lap here. Still working on getting brake temperature and still working on getting front tire temps. To Pouhon. Gotta be a bit cautious, still working on temperatures, particularly across the front axle. Onto the brakes. Brakes are still a little bit grabby. They're not quite totally warmed up yet. Coming up into Stavelot. Is this flat? Yep, it's flat already. And now back up through the original section, the remaining original section, still part of the racetrack. Into Blanchimont, this will be easy flat already. There you go. Brakes. You can see just how long you can stay at full brake before it'll start to lock. That's a combination of the brakes still being in warm-up and the downforce. The car has a lot of downforce. As IER talk about, it can do 3 Gs plus in high-speed corners, so it's got a lot of grip, lots of force pushing those tires into the tarmac. But just as in a formula car, as the speed drops, the downforce drops, and you got to come off the brake. Eau Rouge ready on. Flat out, no problem. On our first flying lap. Coming up toward VMAX. It'll be about 280 clicks. And now, proper braking point. The Cadence Braking, the brakes coming up now. They feel pretty much there. Tires are pretty much there. On the brakes, turning in. Car always going to understeer through here. Down a little bit understeer initially on turn in. And the gravity assisted acceleration back to Pouhon. Have a breath off the throttle, a little bit of trail braking, a little bit too hard over the curbs there. Fania chicane. Always a challenge to get a car's attitude properly situated through here, particularly the first part of it. There we go. Now this is starting to come to me, which means we can now start to speak representatively of how the car behaves. The initial impression that you get is, oh dear, it's not going to stop. And that's because of the brake temperatures. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal. You feel this in iRacing and R Factor 2 as well. If you've got a car that's got carbon brakes, you must get them up to temperature. That's the same deal here. If the brakes are not inside their temperature window, they're just not going to work very well, and you will know all about it when you have a date with the barrier. So, get the brakes up to temperature, get them working, take a lap or two to be very conscious of building temperature in the brakes, particularly the front brakes. As everything warms up, though, you feel everything start to bite better. The brakes, they will be grabby when they're cold. They'll really start to be consistent when they're hot, and that's what you want. Tires, again, they will be cold when you first start out. Warm them up, again, be conscious about it, and then the performance will come to you. On the brakes into Les Combes. When the brakes are working, they're very good, obviously. You get decent feel. It is easy to get into a lockup across the front axle, even at somewhat higher speed, so cadence braking, definitely your friend in here. Initially start out pretty much at full brake and then progressively ramp off as the speed drops, and of course if you've driven open wheelers for a while, you know exactly how to do that. Through high-speed corners such as Pouhon, car feels very stable. The center of pressure here on default setup is dead smack in the middle. Everything reacts very predictably. The car on default is ever so slightly biased to understeer on initial turn-in. However, that can very quickly turn to oversteer if you carry a little bit too much speed into a corner. So just be mindful. Again, it's still a car. Laws of physics still apply. For flat-out corners like this, no problem. Dead straight neutral. It'll do that all day long. In terms of force feedback, well, the better question of force feedback is what do you not feel here? Everything is presented to you with such high rates of fidelity. And I know that some of you are going to start complaining immediately about your force feedback clipping. Well, you're not driving the car. I like how it feels. Shut your face. However, what you feel is absolutely tremendous. Every little bump, every little divot and rut in the road, the curb effects, it's all there. You have absolutely no doubt at any given instant where each corner of the car is. Ran slightly over those exit curbs there at La Source. I felt every last little undulation in that washboard curbing. It's great. We'll throw the car a little aggressively over the entrance curbs there at Eau Rouge and Rédillon and the top of Rédillon and the exit. You feel everything. The little drainage culvert there across the white line into the run-out zone at Rédillon. You feel all of it. Everything is so direct and so communicative. You know exactly where the car is at all times. I hit the edges of the curb there on the approach to Les Combes. Felt that. It unsettled the front end ever so slightly. Again, everything is there. You feel it before you see it. Through understeer, you feel the front axle get light. You feel the tires trying to hunt for grip. It's all so communicative. High-speed corners. Steering weight is actually pretty light. It's not the lightest steering I've ever felt, but you can definitely tell it's power assisted. Not as light as the modern Formula One cars, let's say, but you know it's tossable. You're not really putting out a whole lot of effort to make big steering corrections, even under high loading, so that's good. Of course, that's going to vary depending on your own personal taste with force feedback as well. All of it combines the neutral aerodynamics, the great force feedback, and once they're up to temperature, very consistent tires and brakes. All of it combines to make a very stable platform, which is going to be great for long-run pace, which is exactly what this car is designed for. See there, a little bit of trail braking, keep the nose in. It's fantastic. All the instrumentation in the cockpit, it is very well appreciated. Gives you good information, but not too much. You're not overwhelmed with what's going on in front of you. Gives you just enough. In particular, the shift lights are in a great position. They're bright enough. The colors are conspicuous enough so you know where you are in the rev range. Really, from the overall presentation, the ergonomics aspect, and you know, ergonomics in sim racing is an interesting discussion, but ergonomics in terms of what your eyes need to be looking at, the eye movements you need to make to get data, it looks good. See our fuel economy sitting at 4.6. That's in the lower right of the LCD. And again, that is an instantaneous real-time adjustment. So that does change as you're driving. Gearbox there. Auto blip on the downshifts and an auto cut on the upshifts, so no stabbing at the gas. It's all very good. As we come into the pit lane here, you can see the two red lights flashing in the upper corners of that display. That just shows you that the pit lane speed limiter is active and that the two rear flashers are also active. Do a pit stop here and just show you what that looks like. See, the pit crews have been slowed down a little bit just to emulate the real-world pit stop times for a Le Mans prototype car, an IMSA prototype car, as this car would be. And there you are. So, yes, initially, on default setup, it's a stable platform. You do have to work with it. You have to be conscious of the brake temperatures in particular because they just won't be working when you first get the car out of the garage. But it is very, very stable. Now, these Aero configurations, the adjustments that you can make, they also have a very big impact if you make them a little bit wrong. So let's say, for example, we just take off all of that front downforce. So we don't have all that much rear downforce at this point, but we definitely have more than we have in the front. At the same time, we will totally blank off the brakes. So, yeah, higher number there, less air that goes to the brakes. So no front downforce. We've got more rear downforce than we had in the beginning, which is going to make this car understeer like a pig. But again, I just want to show you that these adjustments do what they claim to do. It's not just a graphical thing. We'll actually have a little bit less straight line speed despite having less front downforce. Let's see. Eau Rouge and Radio still flat. Alright, perhaps we actually have some more straight line speed. No matter, not the point. Get on the brakes. They're cold. Understeer, definitely settling in. I know the tires aren't up to temperature yet, but you can just see already. Yep, look at that. Can't even slow the car down. Yep. There it is. Can't really attack the racetrack in any appreciable or useful way because the aero balance is now all screwed up. So you're not just changing graphical parameters, it actually has an effect. And it's got a pretty dramatic effect, as you can see. See, is this still flat? Nope. There it is. There's the litmus test. The aero settings do something, and they do something pretty dramatic. So again, it's just like setting up any other car, but you just have more fine degrees of adjustment that you can make. Obviously, Blanchimont there, still flat out. The car does make a lot of downforce just via the shape of the body and the under tray, but again, you're fine-tuning settings here, and you need to know how to do that. Back to the pits here. We will put a little bit more of an all-out maximum attack setup on the car. There we go. Softest possible tires. Take a little bit of fuel out. Add a little bit of front downforce. Not all that much. Open up the differential a little bit, power and coast. Preload, you get it to negative preload, which I'm not entirely sure what that will do. 0 or low values make the car agile for initial turn-in. Can also make it nervous or lose traction if driven very abruptly. Let's go for -5. I don't know how you can have a negative torque applied, but apparently you can. we go. First major stop, get the brakes up. There we go, making that corner this time. Hoo-ha, getting the tires up still a little bit. Find your chicane. A little bit of initial understeer will make the second apex a lot better. Wash him off. Hard over those apex curves. You really don't want to touch, but again, the car is pretty compliant over the curbing. What I really like, though, is that initial snap down on the nose that you get when you get hard on the brakes at high speed. It's so convincing. Those heave dampers are fantastic. Great feel. Car has great attitude control. And again, it's a very stable platform. It's exactly what you want in an endurance car. Straight, wait for it, brakes. Very nice. Very good response on initial turn in with a little bit of trail braking. Hesitate a little bit on the power. Just keep the nose tucked in. Very nice. Great initial turn-in response. And just be very gradual with your steering inputs as best you can. Don't want to overwhelm the front end because you're doing a lot with it. You're braking and turning, and always compromises a tire. But as everything is warmed up and the aero starts to work and the car hunkers down, it is tremendously confidence-inspiring. It's stable. It's consistent. It's really everything you want in an endurance car. And of course, just for the more superficial attributes, it's got an IndyCar engine in it. Got a 6-speed sequential box. It's everything that made motorsport cool in the 2000s era, really. There's not too much to be criticized about that. A little bit of oversteer there initially on turn in. Look at this. Ouch. Well, that happens from time to time. Again, the car just eggs you on. It wants you to find its limits, and we found its limits there. Good opportunity to see if we've got any damage textures on the car, and, well, for the most part, we don't appear to. However, the car obviously does carry damage once you hit something. Come back into the pits. We'll tell them to repair the damage, just because. Bring it to a stop. And there you go. The pit stop sequence yet again for your visual enjoyment. Obviously, repairs take a little bit longer than just a tire change, depending on how much damage you've got. Obviously, we have a fair bit of damage on the car, even though it's not graphically modeled, so that takes some time to repair, but things are repairable, just as it would be in a real-world endurance situation. Very useful, and particularly at races like Le Mans or the 24 Hours of Daytona, you have 24 hours, so if you lose a lap, it's not the end of the world in those situations. So you do have the ability to repair damage in the pits, which is very good. And again, if people are going to be doing endurance racing or league endurance racing in particular with this car, it's good to know that you have repair options in the pit lane. As far as we are concerned, though, we will switch it off and really just share some concluding thoughts on this thing. I'm not really a prototype guy. I don't like prototypes all that much. Yeah, they're probably the most similar things to an open-wheeler out there today, but I like open-wheelers. It's just what gets me going. However, knowing that and exposing that inherent bias that I have, what this car is absolutely amazing. If it's not the most exciting car in terms of subject matter, it is the most exciting car in terms of technicalities. What IER have been able to do with this, with the shaders patch, with Content Manager, being able to go into Assetto Corsa via an alternate route and tweak the physics engine to add parameters to it, particularly things that are really difficult to model, like temperature curves, things like that, things that use logarithmic scales rather than linear progressions, and and how that affects car performance in terms of individual components like brakes and tires. That's something that we haven't seen in an Assetto Corsa mod before, and it's something that we've only really seen in other sims before. Assetto Corsa doesn't really have all of those capabilities stock, but with the absolutely incredible modding community that continues to do great things with Assetto Corsa, even with the game being nearly 6 years old, it's incredible that it's still current and that it still is playable as it is, even though I think we've really moved into another generation of sim racing in general. For what that is, for what this car represents in terms of how high we can fly with the technical aspects of Assetto Corsa, this really represents another maybe 4 or 5 years of life in terms of being imminently playable for Assetto Corsa. The technology and the techniques that this car uses are going to open a completely new avenue for subsequent mod developers to go down and to exploit and figure out and fine-tune even more. So for what this car is, if it's not something that, at least in my case, excites me tremendously, what it really represents is the way forward. It represents the present future, the future of the present moment that is currently available in Assetto Corsa, and I'm sure that all of the major modding producers, all the great mod teams that are out there right now, they're going to be taking a very close look at this car indeed, because what's going on under the skin here is truly innovative, and it's only going to move that bar, the proverbial bar, will move inexorably higher for every new project done by every modding team, because what's possible today was impossible yesterday, and this car is certainly the manifestation in 2019 of that maxim in Assetto Corsa. One man's challenge is another man's accomplishment. There it is, the IER P13c. There is a link in the description. Go take a look at it. It is payware, but again, it will not break your bank. And if you really do want to get the best sense of what this car really does offer, you have to drive it. It's very difficult to convey all of the little nuances that I'm feeling through my steering wheel and just with what my eyes are picking up as I'm out on track, because, you have to do it. You have to digest all of that for yourself, because we all look at slightly different things when we're driving, and for you to get the most accurate picture of what I'm on about, you need to drive it yourself. So do check out the link in the description to IER, and if you do decide to purchase this car, you will not regret it. That much I can promise you. For the moment, though, I will leave you with views of hot laps here at Spa from external as well as onboard replays. Take a look, listen to the sounds in their full glory. They're very good. Again, it's that 3.4-liter IndyCar engine. It's a great soundtrack. It really is. And again, it's befitting an absolutely great car and an absolutely wonderful masterstroke of big leaps of progress for Assetto Corsa. Stay tuned for the hot laps, everyone. Until next time, Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you very much for watching, and of course, we will see you soon.